Hello and welcome to this webcast, AI in Life Sciences, Practical Applications in Small Molecule Design. This webcast is hosted by Scientific Computing World and sponsored by Cresset. My name is Robert Rowe, I'm the editor of Scientific Computing World, and our guest panelists today are Dr. Mutlu Dograo, VP of AI Solutions at Cresset, Dr. Mark Mackey, Chief Scientific Officer at Cresset, Dr. Lewis Vidler, Senior Director of Structure-Based Drug Design at Eli Lilly, and Professor Julien Michel, Professor of Biomolecular Simulation at the University of Edinburgh. Dr. Dograo is the VP of AI Solutions at Cresset, where he leads the integration of AI across the company's drug discovery products and services, focusing on productivity, responsible AI practices, systematic AI development, and internal optimizations. Mutlu has an academic background that includes a bachelor's degree in physics, a master's degree in bioengineering, and a PhD in bioinformatics from the University of Cambridge. His research focused on applying machine learning and statistical methods to computational biology problems, including subcellular localization, prediction, and protein motif discovery. Dr. Mark Mackey graduated from the University of Tasmania with a BSc in chemistry, physics, and mathematics. He then moved to the University of Cambridge, where he was awarded his PhD. During this time at Cambridge, Mark first worked with Dr. Andy Winter, founder of Cresset. Upon completing his PhD, Mark worked as a molecular modeler and senior research scientist for NAP Pharmaceuticals and Merck Sharp and Dohme, respectively. In 2002, Dr. Winter invited Mark to join him as a founding member of Cresset. Mark has designed and added fundamental science tools that are now accepted and used by many pharmaceutical, agrochemical, and academic institutions worldwide. In 2010, Mark was appointed Cresset's CSO. Dr. Lewis Vidler achieved his first-class chemistry degree at the University of Oxford in 2009 and subsequently completed his PhD in computational medicinal chemistry at the Institute of Cancer Research in London in 2013. He joined Eli Lilly that year and over the course of the next 7 years progressed to senior research scientist. Following shorter stints as a computational chemist at UCB and Amphista Therapeutics, he returned to Eli Lilly in 2023. Julien Michel is a professor of biomolecular simulation at the University of Edinburgh and founder of Open Biosim. Julien has more than 20 years of experience academic research in biomolecular simulation methodologies and their applications to structure-based drug design problems. He is a member of the management group of the academic consortia CCP Biosim and HEC Biosim. He has a long-standing track record of collaborative research with the pharmaceutical industry and is a co-recipient of the 2020 RSC Capped Green Samoya Award for his work in computational medicinal chemistry. Thank you to each of our speakers for joining us today. Now, on to the topic of today's discussion. Today's event focuses on small molecule design in the life sciences, agrochemical, and biotech sectors. This session will cut through the noise around AI hype to highlight real-world applications already delivering value across research and development workflows. Today's speakers aim to tackle the critical question: is AI all buzz or a transformative force? Our speakers will discuss how AI-driven platforms simplify complex processes, allowing researchers and small businesses to leverage powerful tools without deep technical expertise. In addition, they will focus on how low-code and no-code interfaces accelerate innovation and democratize access to AI, enabling faster, more user-friendly scientific workflows. They will also discuss generative chemistry, using AI for scientific discovery. Generative AI is driving advances in molecule design, enabling the creation of novel compounds with unprecedented speed and efficiency. Finally, they will also discuss how AI-enhanced free energy perturbation, FEP, is transforming predictive modeling and in drug discovery. By integrating AI with FEP techniques, researchers can gain deeper insights into molecular binding affinities, enabling faster, more accurate lead optimization and candidate selection. After the discussion, there will be a question and answer session, which anyone can use to ask our speakers a question. If the speakers do not have time to answer your question today, the information will be passed along to the relevant people so they can follow up at a later date. I should point out that I think you can record your question using voice, but if possible, can you type it out? It just makes it a little bit easier for me during the Q&A session. One final point from me. You may have seen a QR code in the backdrop for the event. This will take you to a web page that will provide more information on the topics our panelists are discussing today. Viewers can either scan that code or click a button in the resources tab and follow the link. So, without further ado, our first question for the panelists. On the topic of AI effectiveness, is the use of AI in life sciences just hype or a useful tool? Medlu, if possible, could we come to you first?
Sure. I think AI in life sciences is absolutely a useful tool, but like any other tool, its value will depend on how it's applied. At Cresset, for example, we see AI not as a magic wand, but as a force multiplier. For example, our LLM, large language model powered PyFlare Copilot, can reduce coding errors, cutting script development time. This is based on several, feedback we received from our internal and external testers for the initial prototypes. So that's basically not hype. We see AI as contributing to multiple projects already in quantifiable significance. And if we also look at agentic AI systems, they are also transforming research by acting as always on collaborators, right? So basically, if a scientist wakes up at 2 a.m., trying to do an FEP calculation or trying to solve a problem, there is an AI companion that can help. That's essentially democratizing expertise in real time. AI was seen as hype, and I agree, heavy reliance on AI without human oversight could be risky, especially in strategic decisions. Of course, it's already mentioned a lot, talked a lot on AI models can hallucinate or propagate biases contained within the training data. But to counterbalance these, we basically ground our tools in RAG. RAG is an excellent methodology, retrieval augmented generation, that helps you to ground your data by pointing your large language models to your data, by ensuring that the responses generated will be coming from a certain selection of data sets that you have. And so essentially, I think a lot of AI technologies have gone beyond being hype, and they made it all the way to production already. And we use it in a very tangible way through our AI copilots. Just to give you a couple of examples, we have a copilot that can answer questions about FLAIR, which is our main CAD software, computer-aided drug discovery software tool. It can answer pretty much any question about how to use FLAIR. And then secondly, we have a complex piece of library, Python library, that is essentially useful for running processes, making complex calculations on the command line using Python scripts. And we have another copilot that can help you to create these scripts very easily based on your natural language input. So you ask a question, you say, I want to align my ligands and I want to, change flare, I want to customize it, I want to add an extension. It will do the coding for you, and it will give you at least a basis, draft version of the script that you want to run for you to improve further. So these are definitely not hype. They are very tangible features. So at Cresset, we are using AI essentially for increasing usability of our tools, but also to speed up development time.
Great. That makes a lot of sense. Mark, did you have any follow-up thoughts on this? Presumably you're in agreement to a certain extent, but what are your thoughts on AI and its usefulness in life sciences?
You are on mute.
Sorry, I think the answer to is it useful or is it hype? The answer is yes. On the grounds that there's definitely places where AI techniques are extremely useful these days, and a wide variety of AI-based models and methods are being used, both in terms of sort of augmented machine learning and in terms of generative AI, as well as other uses like for protein folding. But there's also a lot of hype out there, and there are definitely some things that AI can't do and probably won't be able to do for the foreseeable future in the life sciences, just because there's things we don't understand well enough. There's a lot of biology is still a mystery. And as a result, anybody coming to you with an AI model saying, this could predict toxicity in the human, we just don't understand the biology well enough to do that. So it doesn't matter how good your AI is, we don't have the data to feed it. So the answer is a bit of both. It's definitely useful, but on the fringes, there are some wild claims out there, and you need to take those with a pinch of salt.
Absolutely. Julian, what's your thoughts on this topic?
I think what Mark said resonates with me very much. I mean, I think every technology has to ride a hype wave, and there are many kinds of AI. And so when you say AI, it's not so helpful because you can dig in. There's generative AI. There's what there was before. Now people are all excited about agentic AI and so on, but you have to look at that a bit more closely and ask yourself, what is it can do for me? And not get too excited indeed, because oftentimes the hard questions, things like human talks or target validation, the answer is not there to be found easily. It does require careful investigation in a wet lab. So yes, AI will help streamline, accelerate, but it's still very much scientific endeavor driven by humans when you're talking about complex problem like drug discovery.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, right? That not necessarily all different types of AI have reached the same level of maturity or at this point. Lewis, what are your thoughts on this topic? I mean, it's always difficult to be the last person to speak.
No, I'm happy to kind of continue some of these themes. I mean, there's also a question of like what we mean when we say AI, right? Because within, computational chemistry, we've been using machine learning and applying computational methods for decades now. And sometimes when people say AI, what they actually mean is just the application of computational chemistry and, behind the scenes of, biotechs and pharma companies. Well, it's just applying methods that have been around, but really doing that in a very focused manner. So, when I think about AI, I think about, really the translation of, modern developments in computer science then into relevance into what we're doing in a drug discovery context. And so you can really see examples of that. We've spoken about kind of agentic AI and LLMs and, these methodologies that deliver tools like ChatGPT and other kind of conversational agents. This has been a development in that general space. Then we can think about how do we then apply those developments in a drug discovery sense. And so, sort of co-scientists, driven by LLMs, I think there's huge opportunities in those spaces. You know, we've seen huge development in like image generation and, you know, diffusion-based methods. We're now seeing kind of diffusion-based methods to design molecules in binding sites, applying very similar principles. So when there are these new developments, to me, that's what, you know, when I think of AI, that's really, you know, what I'm thinking, that real forefront of methods. And then the question of like hype versus utility, it's all relative to expectation, right? So if your expectation is that we're going to deliver drugs within just a few rounds of synthesis, yes, that's you know, that's probably hype that doesn't exist in reality. But the question as to whether these things are useful, well, in the absence of some of these tools, we would probably be worse at driving projects forwards. And so sometimes in drug discovery, our benchmark is just doing something at random. You know, say we run a screen of molecules, screening, you know, many thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of compounds in a random sense. If we're able to use tools to give us enhanced hit rates, well, we've done better than random, and therefore we've been useful in those senses. So in a practical sense, yes, totally, these things are useful. From an investor sense, say, like, yeah, maybe it's that this is hype because the expectation doesn't match up with reality necessarily. But if your expectation is just, can I do better than the status quo, then totally these things are useful.
Great, thank you very much. And that provides a perfect segue. I guess a couple of you have mentioned agentic AI systems, and I wanted to delve into that a little bit more. How are agentic AI systems changing how researchers interact with data and kind of perform routine or complex tasks in the laboratory? Mark, would you like to go first on this one?
So I think that you know, the use of agentic systems in our field is a little bit in its infancy. I think that there are definitely some other sort of areas of industry that have leapt into this faster than we have. I see the use case here as being one where we expand the usability of a lot of these tools. So certainly in computational chemistry, yeah, a lot of ComChem does happen, you know, one molecule at a time, where people are, you know, really focused on the details. But a lot of it also happens at scale. And having experiments that happen at scale, you want those to be robust, repeatable, well documented. And there've been a variety of sort of pipelining and workflow tools set up to do that, Pipeline Pilot and NIME and things like that in the past. But all of those have ended up with an element of, you have to at least be able to think like a programmer to be able to use those. And I think the advent of more agentic systems, where you have the ability more to describe what you want and then have the system work out how to do it, rather than say, okay, I need, you know, the end result is this, so I'm going to need to do A and then B and then C and then D, and describe, you know, each of those in some sort of user interface in mind-numbing detail, could end up basically allowing more people access to high throughput experimentation, high throughput data, in a way that wasn't possible in the past. And so I think that's quite exciting as a way of looking forward.
Yeah, that's a great point. I guess people, you know, in the past, we've looked at agentic AI as being something to, you know, increase efficiencies and kind of drive things forward, make them faster. But there's also the usability angle as well. Julian, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think so. I would echo Mark's view that agentic AI in computational chemistry is still very much in its infancy. For me, I see real potential in indeed as a, you know, sort of replacement or a different way to do orchestration of workflows. And the possibilities, I also see possibilities for developers as well, because it's sort of, you know, the hope is that it free yourself in some ways of you know, the also the middleware stuff that you have to do just to be able to benchmark a methodology. And of course that's important, this work to, you know, to validate the utility of a method. but it's not necessarily, the best use of your time. If you're really an expert in the field, you might want, to develop some tools that improve aspects of a complex problem. And it would be, if we can, anything we can do to lower barrier to drop that tool, integrate it into an ecosystem, and and learn. So what is the utility, in a complex environment that, as an individual, I cannot reproduce with, low internal resource in the academic setting or small startup. I think that there's a good question to ask around that space. Is this a potential use of agentic AI? And also potentially it's a slightly more controllable environment, right? Because I think the real difficulty is thinking you're gonna, the more hype is around, agent replacing humans and so on. But there's a lot of issue with the context in which we work, where you can imagine this system running into all sorts of trouble. But we can think of what is a relatively closed aspect of day-to-day tasks that we as molecular modelers do, and think about how you could rely on your assistant doing the legwork much faster than you would do otherwise.
Yeah, that makes sense. Lewis, do you have any thoughts on this, and how agentic AI systems are kind of changing how we interact with data?
Yeah, totally. I mean, the reality is that the majority of our drug discovery projects, the majority of the team members there are not computational experts. And so we've got many methods within computational chemistry and, in other projects and, other computational tools. And so there can be very often kind of disconnects between or opportunities where you could have a computational tool that could impact that project and add value. Yet those opportunities aren't leveraged because the team aren't aware of the tool, they don't know how to access the tool, and there's this gap. And so I've spent quite a significant amount of my career actually teaching chemists to use computational tools and educating them around opportunities when they can leverage those tools. Agentic AI, I think, I see as providing it's almost like a translation layer between, the computational methods and language that kind of humans can understand. And so that can take forms of humans, saying, oh, rather than them, contacting me and saying, oh, hey, Lewis, could you do this analysis on these compounds? And typically my response is, oh, I can teach you how to do that, but I might not want to run it myself. But that you have this kind of agent that could go, oh yeah, I'll go and do it, and it understands the kind of context of what you've described, and then is able to execute kind of actions as a result. I think there's a huge opportunity for that. The other piece then is around general automation, in that a lot of our programs run with a sort of repeating sequence of events, like data gets generated and certain actions happen in response to that data. Agents could totally handle a lot of that. And so, we would like to think, and we, in my opinion, we do hire lots of smart, creative scientists. And you don't want to get your smart, creative scientists spending all their time manipulating files and looking up data and doing real just handle turning type activities. And so the ability for agents to sort of focus on really important information, summarize that, and really get that into the hands of our human experts, and operating in a really kind of symbiotic type mode, I think there's huge opportunity for that, for really enhancing the productivity of human scientists. And I would also say I don't think we're quite ready for the AI to totally take on the entire project. There may be chances where it can run the drill in an automated sense, but right now I think the sweet spot is really tying that with the human to deliver overall increased both efficiency but also quality of the work being done.
Do you have any final thoughts on this topic?
Yes, sure. So I just want to clarify a couple of things. For me, agentic AI is very simple. It's essentially no different than any other AI system based on large language models. Apart from the fact that they can operate autonomously, they can collaborate with each other, and they have expertise, on one particular subject. right? So essentially, if you think of a large language model like ChatGPT, you talk to it, you get an answer, fine. And then you can point that entity to your data. That's, a slightly more advanced use. It's called RAG. And agentic AI is where you build such dedicated LLMs with a focus which you can chain together in a more complex pipeline, or you can create a hierarchical system of these agents to solve a more complex problem. They collaborate in the background. There is no need for the human to be involved in all the intermediate stages of these interactions, but the final output is presented to the human, right? So agentic AI is nothing but AI systems that can work together autonomously, making decisions and performing tasks with minimal human intervention, right? That's why they are called agents, right? And unlike traditional AI models that follow predefined rules, agentic AI can adapt, learn, and act independently based on real-time data and evolving circumstances as well. For me, agentic AI is great because of its potential. Again, maybe I may be, jumping from one topic to the other here, but I use agents to reduce hallucinations as well. Because the way we construct agents is they can execute just one capability or one functionality, right? Do ligand alignment or perform docking. For me, each of these steps is one agent, right? So if that's the case, if an agent is only capable of doing one thing, such as executing a predetermined, pre-written Python script, then you are essentially reducing the potential of that LLM to go stray, to output crazy stuff, because all it's doing is determining what script to run, and that's it. So it's a nice way of containing all these great LLM potentials in a very clever way. The potential for these within drug discovery solutions is great, because we want more determinism and less human input when it comes to orchestration of complex tasks. We humans want to concentrate on the more strategic stuff. So for example, the way we are thinking of leveraging agentic AI in future versions of our products is workflow orchestration, where each pipeline step is controlled, owned by one agent, and then a human gives the directions in natural language, and we construct a workflow in the background, basically stitching together these agentic AI capabilities. Right.
Okay, yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Next, I wanted to talk about, what are the risks or limitations of relying heavily on AI for strategic decision making? Julian, would you like to take this one first?
Well, I guess the risks are significant. I think if you take strategic decisions, right, it's because it's not an easy call, almost by definition. And so, that's why you may have to do it based on, limited data, context. So yes, I would, especially in life science, I think we're quite far from the time where, you should ask your AI to, decide what's going to be, your preclinical portfolio strategy or all that, right? So I think first, let's not get too excited. I think let's automate the boring tasks that modelers have to do. I mean, everyone who's been into the industry and who has had to shortlist 500 solutions from some virtual screening campaign. This is not the best use of time after a while. So there's obvious steps where you make this 10 times faster and people will have more brain power for using their time more effectively. And that will include for a while strategic decision making.
Yeah, I guess I should point out, I don't think any of our speakers here today are advocating for giving your strategic decision making to the AI system. I just, Lewis, what are your thoughts on potential kind of risks and limitations in this area?
Yeah, I think it's in some ways is that all of our computational methods have like some predictive power, but not full predictive power. So it's around building on kind of what Julien was saying around letting kind of the AI make decisions. It kind of relates to the importance of those decisions. If it's, say, selecting compounds for a virtual screen, well, it doesn't matter if we select 1,500 or if we select 1,000. Testing another 500 compounds doesn't really make a difference. Even if a human reviewed those and we're like, oh, I don't really want to test those. Once we start moving along, if we're thinking about using these to automate aspects of drug discovery, where we're going, okay, well, what compounds should we, make? What assays should we test these things in? The more significant the assay, or the more significant the kind of cost, both from a financial, but also a time, and also in some cases ethical considerations as well. You may have an AI that goes, oh, let's put this straight in vivo into a PK study, because it ticks all the boxes. And there may be reasons why you may do that, but doing that in the absence of a human checking in and going, is this really adding significant value to our overall kind of data package? That's still kind of the kind of risk. I think we're far from a kind of fully automated drug discovery setup, but there are lots of opportunities to automate aspects of the process. And having the ability to check in with our human scientists and saying, the AI goes, oh, I think we should do this, and I don't think we should do this for these reasons, and the human being able to review and going, oh yeah, that makes sense, or another time going, oh no, I think we should kind of pause and reflect on that before we make the next decision. That human decision making, and often in drug discovery we're operating in uncertainty. Humans can make those decisions and then own those decisions, and operating in that space in a sort of what we would like to think a reasonably effective manner, but at least there's ownership of those decisions. That, well, who decided to do that? Well, oh, I did as the project lead. The AI made decisions, you blame the AI. Like, ultimately humans are still responsible, so they kind of have to, there's this like, who's responsible for some of the decisions that gets made too. But I think there's definitely practical opportunities to enhance the process, but yeah, we do need to be mindful of risks associated that, maybe even with inventorship and things like that of our molecules, of who actually designed that compound. Was it the AI or was it the team?
That's a very interesting point. Mutlu, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, I mean, risk of over-reliance is that doing things without understanding biology or chemistry. And it's a major risk, right? So that's why AI should be seen as an assistant rather than a replacement to the scientist. It helps definitely scientists explore more ideas faster, but human interpretation is essential, and it's about the AI human symbiosis, not substitution, right? So over-reliance could be a question mark. We need to know how to use AI best to our advantage. We need to always consider the risks involved, the ethical and regulatory challenges, traceability. These systems might be behaving, great. They may give you, great output, great results, but jumping from one problem to the other, they may not repeat the same performance. It's a black box. We don't know what's going under the hood most of the time. So we need to cross-check facts and verify the output, validate all decisions, but it's definitely a great helper tool, even for thinking about more strategic things.
Mark, do you have any final thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I think the word strategic is doing quite a lot of heavy lifting in the question. Yeah, I think anybody who's suggesting should we take this compound forward into the clinic and getting ChatGPT to provide the answer to that is in deep trouble. I think the primary use case for AI, particularly language models for that sort of thing, is in essence providing a more informed and hopefully more intelligent version of the rubber duck. If you haven't come across the rubber duck, it's a standard technique in programming. If you're not quite sure how to solve a problem, you explain it to your rubber duck. And usually explaining the problem to your rubber duck, that's enough to actually give you some insights as to how you should solve the issue, because to explain the problem, that makes you understand it better. And so I can see cases where talking through a decision with language challenge that decision, if anything I haven't thought of, any things in the background information that I should be aware of, absolutely that could help you make strategic decisions. But in terms of actually allowing the AI to do those decisions, we're definitely not there yet.
Yeah, I wanted to maybe move on to the next topic, talking about combining AI and physics-based methods, specifically FEP. What are the key barriers to broader adoption of FEP, particularly in smaller biotech firms or in academic research? How may AI help to overcome these barriers? Lewis, would you like to go first on this one?
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of maybe slightly more from the big pharma perspective than the kind of small biotech. But I mean, I think routinely now, we're leveraging these kinds of sort of physics-based, simulation-based methods to assess compounds, and we see signal from those models that, like my comment earlier of what's our expectation, and if we're comparing to not using them, generally I would suggest that we're doing better as a result of using them. The challenge though, there's kind of maybe two challenges. One is that there's often fairly significant computational expense, which can be solved with cloud or significant investments in hardware. There's also a certain amount of expertise required within big pharma. Yes, we can find folks who have worked in these spaces, and we have a number of experts in these spaces, but it's still they still spend a lot of time some of it doing the high value sort of scientific stuff, the other thing just getting the stuff to run, setting up, checking that everything's kind of come together, or if it's a 3D structure-based method, well, you need a pose for your compound to start from, and if your docking methods to put that in may or may not be working, well, then you need to spend manual time fixing those things. And so there is a whole chunk of kind of human just setup and managing of kind of calculations involved in leveraging these. And so that mixed with AI and being able to, where you don't have to be quite so expert in the use of these tools, and sort of democratizing methods and making them much more available to other scientists, there's absolutely huge value in that. I think across the kind of pharma sector, within big pharma, being able to utilize them more and being more efficient, and in some cases in the kind of either academic or smaller sectors, giving access when there just may not have been access before because that expertise just didn't exist in that company.
Medley, what are your thoughts on this topic and broader adoption of FEP and how AI can help?
I think that's a great topic, but just I'm conscious some of the audience members may not know what we are talking about here exactly. So FEP is free energy perturbation. Essentially, it's a very accurate computational method to predict binding affinities between ligands and targets, right? So AI can be used in different ways here. FEP, unlike docking, is a complex operation. Its setup is more involving. As such, there will be a lot of parameters that you may want to optimize before you run these expensive runs that may take days and days and days. FEP can be utilized in a more clever way in an active learning pipeline where you iteratively build new machine learning models to do better predictions, and then you use the outputs of these to create yet another machine learning model that will hopefully give you better results and so on. So if you view AI as both ML and LLM, then there is definitely space for machine learning in that we can approximate these very expensive costly calculations with machine learning. And if you look at AI as LLMs, then FEP orchestration can be handled by AI. FEP setup configuration can be optimized with a human in the loop, with AI suggesting parameters, optimizing the number of ligands, things that go into the calculation, how many molecules to consider in each iteration, and many other parameters. So I see it both as an ML, LLM space where both can be very helpful in different ways.
Mark, what are your thoughts on this? It seems like this could help lower the barrier to entry to use FEP.
I'm going to slightly expand the question out on this one. Beyond FEP, to looking at can we predict binding affinity? At the moment, FEP is sort of the gold standard. It's not cheap, but it can give pretty accurate estimates of the binding affinity of molecules. And there's a bit of a sort of capability gap in that FEP is often, not always, but often accurate, but is always expensive in terms of compute time. We get a lot of methods that are much cheaper, but their reliability is dubious at best, and they're just minute number generators at worst. So GBSA and docking scores and things like that. So I think there is some interesting motion towards deep learn models, AI models, being built to try and predict binding affinities. So there's a recent paper that's made quite a lot of stir on a new model called Boltz-2, which claims to be able to do this. How well that works, I think, remains to be seen. There have been criticisms that a lot of these methods, when you're training an AI, you're saying you want to learn by giving it a goal. And AI is a lot of the good old-fashioned algorithms. The problem they have is if they can get the right answer by cheating, they will. And so a lot of methods in the past that appeared to be able to predict binding affinities, actually, when you go and poke them, what they've done is they've memorized that kinases look like this, and kinase inhibitors look like this, and if your protein looks like a kinase, and the inhibitor looks like a kinase inhibitor, then I know that's how they work, which does well in the benchmarks, but tends not to be much use in the real world. But I'm hoping that the field can get beyond that. Incredibly rapid. And so I think there's likely to be, over the next few years, a bunch of, in essence, middle methods. I think the deep learning methods are going to struggle to match the accuracy of FEP all the time. But I think they will definitely be able to be better than docking scores and probably better than things like MMGBSA, and can fill that middle ground of, takes a moderate amount of computer time, has moderately good accuracy, where we're really missing that gap. And then the other thing that I think that we can do is less so AI, but more in terms of traditional machine learning. There are things we can do to build local models and do things like active learning FEP, where we can, in essence, get the best bang for our buck, in that we can run FEP on some of our molecules and then use modeling to work out what the answers would have been for the other ones without actually having to run the expensive calculations. And that acts as a force multiplier, and particularly for smaller biotechs who are always cost conscious, I think that could be quite important.
That's a great point. Julian, would you have any thoughts on this? Whether it relates to FEP or just other techniques to predict binding affinities.
So I guess just to to add briefly to what's been said already. Yes, I think when you say FEP, there's going to be many ways, many decisions to make to actually run an FEP calculation, and it's would be overwhelming for a human. So all of that tends to be hidden behind user interface with some kind of best decision made ahead of time. But the reality is that when you work on different problem class, you may want different settings, and if you're able to tap into knowledge of what has worked in the past, and you have recorded that, and of course AI will be good at connecting the dots. This new program X, it's looking like a bit like this historical program somewhere else, and you can do it especially for large organization at a scale that no human could do, or potentially we can think of ways of sharing that across organization in due course. So that should help make successful deployment of these techniques more effective. So that's one way you can see AI helping you with making the right decision before you run the calculations. We already touched on active learning and so on. So really as a tool to democratize expertise. Currently, you only get it if you spend time developing that in an academic settings, or or maybe you go work for pharma organization, but there's not enough people with a deep expertise available to be recruited by all the organization who could benefit from that. So I think AI will help on that space.
In what ways could AI assist in setting up, analyzing, or accelerating FEP calculations, making them more accessible? Maybe.
I can take that if you want, very quickly.
Yes, sorry, I just muted myself. I was going to ask if you could take that one.
Sure. So as I was mentioning, in my previous response, AI can help us by automating some of the aspects of the complex FEP runs. So it can detect common errors. It can suggest optimal simulation parameters. And there is also the usage, that involves using FEP as a filter. So you generate some candidates, you have some, potential ligands. You use FEP as the reality check. Essentially, you do the calculation and tells you whether your decision or your candidate was good or bad, right? AI is pretty much on top of everything I said here. It can act as a orchestrator, as an enabler of FEP to make it more accessible, to make it more manageable by medicinal chemists when they are launching expensive long runs. So we are aiming at Cresset to build some intelligent agents that can simplify FEP workflows making it essentially possible for even non-experts to run complex simulations with confidence.
Thank you for expanding on that. Mark, do you have any follow-up comments on that topic of kind of orchestration and how AI can help use FEP?
Yeah, I think that sort of ties into a slightly wider question about one of the things that I think in the future AI is going to be useful for, is once we have enough material available to train these systems, I think there's definitely a case where the AI can learn enough to not replace an expert, but sort of augment or provide a stand-in for an expert. And as a result, although it won't know everything, it will have enough sort of knowledge and background to be able to say, okay, you're setting out an FEP experiment. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? I had a look at your protein. It looks, your protein looks like a class of proteins that we know suffer from this problem. Have you considered what you're going to do about that? And so I think in the future, there's going to be, the AI probably won't replace a knowledgeable computational chemist in terms of guiding, say, a medicinal chemist to do the work. But I think with the background having been set up by knowledgeable users, the AI can then look over your shoulder and just make sure you don't make any mistakes, and that you are running the experiment in the best fashion possible to extract the maximum amount of information out of the experiments you're running. And I think FEP, because it's so expensive computationally, is a really good use case for that. That you don't want to hit the button on an FEP and have a big calculation running over the weekend. It's just use $1,000 worth of Amazon time or whatever, and then you discover on Monday that I forgot to check this checkbox, and as a result, I've been running in the wrong ensemble. Results were all meaningless. So having something looking over your shoulder saying, before you do that, here's the checklist that I've learned. I think you need to think about this, and end up being quite valuable.
Julian, do you have any thoughts on this topic?
Yeah. So I think to add to what's been said already, so you can think of ways you can also start to really marry AI and FEP and up to a point where I think in a few years from now it will be hard to tell the difference. But to give you a few concrete examples, I mean already you can think of using AI to augment the analysis on an FEP calculation. For instance, you can train AI to predict the error made by an FEP calculation, and then correct the simulation to begin with. And it can be shown that there are situations where actually it's easier to train a model to predict the error rather than trying to predict the quantity to begin with. And in a way, you basically leverage physics modeling for predicting things that are difficult to extrapolate, and you're left with some things that's easier to work with, and that's a nice example where if you have a strategy to collect data at scale, you can refine your model over time so that your FEP is not static, right? As you get data, you get better at correcting errors. Then itself, I mean, we're starting to see, machine learning technique used to replace the way we model energies and interactions between molecules. That is really deep, integral to an FEP engine, and that allows us to run simulation at higher accuracy because we can train model to be surrogate of quantum mechanical calculation that would have been too expensive to begin with, and also to target new use case that we would shy away from using traditional FEP approach, things like covalent binder or metalloenzymes and so on. And the AI approach also being based on data and training also give you another angle to continuously refine your model and an opportunity therefore for people also to start with a baseline FEP technology, but then differentiate it internally based on their internal data and know-how. And I think that's going to be a very, very appealing way to, to think about hybridizing the two concepts to generate value in your own organization. And all the aspects of the simulation itself, we said FEP is slow and it takes a while, but we can also think of ways AI can help accelerate the sampling of conformation, and that's still arguably more in its infancy. But there's very ideas out there that could make FEP calculation 10 times, 100 times cheaper than what they are now, and that again would immediately translate into more use case.
Lewis, finally, is there anything you'd like to add to what's been said already?
Yeah, I'll be quick. Yeah, the only thing I would say is basically everyone is busy, and if you significantly reduce like barrier to entry, then uptake will increase significantly. So if you have something which is valuable or provides some value, the cheaper it is to run, the more use you will get, and the perceived value is just going to be higher. So orchestrating these sorts of things just means that people who wouldn't have run it now would run it, then they get the results, and those results they maybe respond to and leverage in the decisions they make, and therefore our decisions, we hope, would then be of higher value because they've got more data to consider in the decisions they make. And there's real value in that, even though in some cases it's not the most glamorous, just making access to tools, but it can provide real value in the real world.
Absolutely. Now we do have some extra questions on this topic, but I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to move on to low code, no code. Particularly how are low code or no code AI platforms helping researchers streamline workflows or automate repetitive tasks? Mark, would you maybe take this one first, if possible?
Sure. So I think this sort of ties into something we were talking about earlier in terms of sort of the agentic AI, and that it's largely solving some of the same issues. And it particularly is the case that I'm quite old now, so I sort of remember how things were back in the day. But if you're looking at how modeling was done a while ago, we didn't have computing power to run things at scale, and so experiments were much more human intensive. You would have small numbers of compounds with possibly a bit more thinking and a bit less compute. Whereas now we can, and as a result do, look at things in much larger scale. And that does mean that there's the sort of thing where user interfaces tend not to be quite as good at, certainly in the computational chemistry world. Our modeling tools are much more designed to look at a few ligands in a protein than to look at 1,000,000 ligands and 1,000 proteins. So if you want to do that, and we often do, then largely that's done at the moment through coding. And as a result, most computational chemists end up being Python hackers to a greater or lesser degree. But it does present a barrier to entry. Some people don't like coding or don't want to do it or don't know how to do it, and there's an issue there. And so having the ability of more sort of workflow, low code and no code environments, in general, computational chemists are not computer scientists. We're not trained programmers. We've sort of picked up a bit of Python here and there. But if I want to do something, then if I've got to open WordPad or Notepad and start typing a Python program from scratch, it's going to be difficult. I'm going to spend a lot of time Googling. If I can get an AI code chatbot assistant to say, look, I want to do this. Can you write me a script? Even if the script it writes isn't exactly what I wanted, it's probably pretty close. And it's so much easier to start with something that nearly does what you want and tweak it than to write something from scratch. And again, so I think this sort of democratizes access to the more complicated tasks that we want to do, in that you no longer necessarily need to be an expert coder. You can be more of a dilettante, you can be more of a dabbler and still get where you want. And this then extends forward into sort of the agentic frameworks, which take that one step forward into the no code, where actually I don't need to see the Python at all. I just tell the AI what it wants behind the scenes. It will write and execute some Python, but that's not my problem. I've asked it to do something. It's gone and done it. Life's good.
Julia, what are your thoughts on this topic of kind of low code, no code?
Yeah, so I'll share story of at a conference recently. I went to a MedChem conference and I was chatting with people there, and most of them were not computational chemists. And in the discussion, it turned out that one of these person had used a very what I would consider very advanced methodology in my field. And turned out the reason they could do that and make good use of it for their own project is because it had been made accessible quite easily via some form of SaaS platform service, it made me appreciate the speed at which we can distribute new technology, leveraging these solutions. So I think, yes, there is the aspect of democratizing access to tool, but also there's probably going to be a large increase in available tool as well as a result, which surely is going to be a good thing in order to provide people with more opportunities to find the tools that give them valuable data to progress with their project.
And Lewis, do you have anything to add to this topic and how low code, no code can impact scientists?
Yeah, and in some ways, I'm a bit of a compared to Mark when he initially trained, I'm in some ways a sort of a next generation of kind of flavor of computational chemist. I mean, I trained as a chemist, and I almost actively avoid the coding aspects, and I'm not a computational chemist because I love computational chemistry. I'm a computational chemist because I love driving medicinal chemistry programs, and computational chemistry is an extremely powerful tool for helping drive those programs. And so if I can avoid coding, if I can avoid the sort of those aspects which to me feels like a chore, what I care about is the outputs, and I care about how I can use those and help decision making and work with medicinal chemistry teams. And so the things that evolve in this direction, I'm a heavy KNIME user, and I've taught lots of people to use KNIME, which is a kind of low code environment, visual programming package. Is that using these means that I or others don't have to be experts in writing the code. Whereas if I was a computational chemist 20, 30 years prior, well, many of those tools didn't exist. So I would literally have to write the tool, and you needed to have much stronger kind of computer science skills. But we can't be experts in everything, which means if you're going to go hard onto the computer science skills, well, you're maybe neglecting aspects of medicinal chemistry and how drug discovery works, and therefore your ability to then apply those tools in the real world becomes limited. And I think as tools become more accessible to many more users, you can have folks who really understand the problems, or the person actually posing the problem or has the issue on the project is also the one that's able to run the tool. And historically, that wasn't always the case, which means the people running the tools are asking the right questions and getting then valuable results out, because there's not this breakdown in communication and lack of understanding. And AI, as I say, no code is hugely preferable to low code, right? Because there's no code at all. But as long as those tools actually are useful and give you what you want, but in terms of the direction of travel, I only really see one direction of travel, where rather than having dedicated computational chemists on projects, well, everyone is a computational chemist, and the division between these disciplines really breaks down, and that everyone is a drug hunter, and medicinal chemistry projects are ultimately successful.
That's a great point. I guess it's making it more accessible to people who don't want to code. Yourself being the example, and then also people like Mark who aren't necessarily adverse to it, but it can still give those people a boost as well. It kind of works both ways. Mulu, do you have any thoughts on this topic?
I echo the comments on democratization. It is really empowering scientists to turn ideas into tools that can perform actions without any major software engineering knowledge and experience. So it's a big asset for many medicinal chemists, those without programming experience, to test out their ideas and use these CAD tools comfortably. I just want to make a small distinction between low code and no code, maybe. So low code is generally good if you are a developer, computational chemistry user, know somewhat basic programming, or you know a lot of programming, but you are not familiar with a particular software library, such as the Cresset PyFlare API, and you don't want to keep reading all the documentation. So low-code AI capabilities are going to help with speed of development. You are essentially still using code to do things, right? But it's a shortcut. Whereas no code doesn't involve any programming experience, and it can be more beneficial for medicinal chemists, wet lab scientists with no coding experience. And the primary objective of no code is ease of use rather than speed of development, because there's no code here that we see as an end user. And no code will involve existing pre-built templates that we can just simply modify according to our needs, according to the project needs. And the example I gave at the beginning, workflows, AI orchestrated workflows are great examples to no-code AI experiences, because you are stitching together a pipeline, a workflow that's built with natural language, and there is no code involved, right? Essentially, both of these approaches are to make sure people from different backgrounds, no matter a lot about coding, or no matter whether how much you know about CAD software, you still be able to benefit from these biochemistry capabilities and software tools. That's the essence of it, I think. So it's low code isn't about dumbing down science, it's about scaling it, making it widely used by more people.
Absolutely. No, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for pointing that out. We're going to have to move on to generative AI for generative chemistry. Sorry. How is Gen AI accelerating early stage molecule design? Particularly, I guess, compared to traditional. Julian, would you mind going first, please?
Yeah, so I think in the early stage of molecular design, this tool, actually would be useful to have probably Louis' perspective on that, because I am more on the back seat on that. But the way I see it is that it seems to be a useful source of idea generation that you can, put alongside ideation by humans when you're onto a project. There's always, a stage where, you have a compound and you're trying to think what you're going to modify, and you can have, a discussion, bringing different perspectives to the table. So that, and Gen AI, when applied, wisely, can make suggestions that are actually, actionable. There's, that's something that may take you somewhere where you may not have thought about it otherwise. And a good way also to, when you have data at scale in the organization, to tap into the broader institutional knowledge that you may have, but that you cannot bring in one meeting room for a particular project.
Thank you very much. Lewis, what are your thoughts on Gen AI, and compared to traditional screening?
Yeah, I guess when we think about kind of, medicinal chemistry, we've got kind of finding the starting point, and then we've got optimizing that thing that we found. And the things within each of those spaces are actually quite different. And so in a kind of hit finding type activity, traditionally we would have methods around virtual screening. And, I think there's, we've seen successful examples of virtual screening at Lilly, and there's plenty in the public domain. The kind of analogy in the kind of AI world is where we have things like diffusion models and other kind of, models where we're generating molecules in binding sites, trying to meet the requirements of that binding site in a fully novel chemical space. The challenge with generating molecules like that is that generally those need to be custom made. Like it's not off-the-shelf molecules that we can purchase or that we can synthesize in an automated fashion. And so because very little information is known at that point, committing full synthetic resource with a molecule that actually it may have a higher probability of success than random or our virtual screening, but still the major likelihood is that it will be inactive. And so you really need to kind of go hard on that. And from, generally, I think the pharma's perspective would be that, a sort of screen of some sort would probably increase overall the likelihood of success. Would I rather screen 1,000 compounds selected from a virtual screen with molecules off the shelf, or a handful of compounds that I've generated through Gen AI, or 100,000 that I've screened out of our collection in a random sense? So I think Gen AI, in terms of that hit finding space, is still in its infancy in terms of maybe there's some exploratory work going on, but in terms of having it becoming really part of the process, it's too early to make an impact. Then you have that other aspect, that optimization, where we're taking aspects of molecules that we're maintaining chunks of those molecules, and we know they already bind or inhibit or have the function we're looking for, and we're now perturbing them and designing new molecules that we change bits for something new. In our sort of more traditional methods, we might think about, library generation, collections of fragments and things that we might replace. I know the folks in Cresset have tools both in that virtual screening and in that fragment replacement type mode. But in that kind of generative AI sense, methods that maybe expand that chemical space a bit more significantly, rather than sort of chopping bonds and replacing fragments, maybe being able to be a little bit more creative in the kinds of changes they might perform, doing more significant connectivity differences in designing compounds. Also, because these are within existing kind of scaffolds, we often have chemistry established. And so the team will go, oh yeah, well, that's already the bit we know. This bit's new, but oh yeah, I can see the binding mode. Oh yeah, maybe we should give that a shot. And also our later projects tend to have more resource than our early projects, and certainly in terms of synthetic organic chemistry. And so you're much more likely to have, to do things in those spaces. And we're seeing examples where these generative, more modern generative methods have been able to propose things that have subsequently then, delivered impact for those projects. So I would say there's more kind of maturity and kind of growing experience in leveraging them in the optimization phase, as opposed to the hit finding phase.
Sorry, I didn't unmute myself. Just on that point, can do retrosynthesis, prediction or tools to predict binding affinities, whether that be FEP or other tools, do they play a role in kind of validating Gen AI, molecules?
If that was that for me to continue, or was that?
Well, I mean, yeah, I guess just on your point, and I'll carry it on.
Like, I guess quick comment from just in terms of that piece. yes, retrosynthesis goes like, look, you can make these, which is great, but they still need to be made, like, which is the bigger expense. But you're right that things like FEP, there are cases where we might throw our full computational suite of assessment tools to say, like, look, we really do believe this has a chance of working, and that's where you're trying to increase that probability of success and trying to balance that against other approaches. So yeah, you're absolutely right. As our methods generally improve, we can make more compelling arguments and increase the probability of being successful.
Sorry for derailing the conversation there. Mutlu, what are your thoughts on Gen AI, and it's you compared to traditional screening?
Yeah, we see Gen AI being used to create images and videos now as well. And we have some very realistic examples now emerging, from provided by different companies in the general domain. And specifically, when we look at the use of Gen AI in this way in the chemistry space, this is an immensely useful thing to do because, it takes a lot of time to generate meaningful, plausible molecules and then to screen them. With generative AI models improving, we see, tools that can generate molecules de novo, or just generating parts of molecules very cleverly. And these systems, models can be used in conjunction with some filters. Now we having just spoken about FEP, we can use FEP as a filter, as a reality check, as I mentioned. But FEP is expensive, so you can plug in different machine learning models and scores that will give you some feedback about the molecule that was generated. But even before generation, it's possible to design a molecule with these in mind, binding affinity, solubility, novelty, and then you can optimize across multiple objectives at the same time. And for me, the main benefit lies in its speed. You can generate thousands, millions of molecules and score them very quickly with these efficient, fast ML approaches. And that's a great, I think, a recent addition to pretty much all chemistry platforms in the drug discovery space. A lot of pharma companies are already leveraging this, and this is great news for smaller biotech who didn't have all the toolings and means for dealing with databases, searches, optimization. So all of these are becoming more reachable, more mainstream in this CAD software world.
Great, thank you. And Mark, any closing thoughts on this topic?
Again, showing my age, if you go back a couple of decades, the big fad at the time was some genetic algorithm techniques to go and build molecules from scratch. And that ended up with, in essence, exactly the same issues that Lewis identified, in that it doesn't matter if it designs a great molecule, some poor sod's got to go and make it. And with de novo design molecules, that can often be extremely hard and expensive. So I agree with Lewis that I think the primary use case at the moment is in the sort of the lead optimization phase, where you want to change this bit of the molecule, and the generative AI can potentially suggest some things that you as a chemist might not have thought of. And some of the stuff it will suggest might not be a good idea, but some of it may be a good idea. And it provides you with more options. And more options and more choice is always good.
Absolutely. Now we are fast running out of time. So I'm going to kind of. Oh, sorry, Mutlu, were you saying something?
No.
Yeah, so we are fast running out of time, so I'm going to kind of move us across to our Q&A session. Just thank you all to our speakers for this very informative discussion. First up, we have a question here. Kind of, we're facing the point where AI models, are coming up against physics-based approaches face to face. How can we embrace both or integrate to improve results on our drug discovery projects? Mutlu, would you maybe have a go at this one if possible?
Yeah, I mean, so this is again about using something like FEP as a filter. The model might propose 500 molecules, but we narrow that down to 50 with good docking scores, and then run FEP on the top 10, for example. This is one of our internal projects, and we published a paper on active learning as well, how we combine machine learning with FEP, physics-based stuff, combined with machine learning models. It's a very concrete published methodology that is already becoming capability within our tool sets as well, within our AI platform. So essentially, it's all about using different validation techniques, ML-powered as shortcuts to existing physics-based tools. But then, if you look at how physics-based tools are working, we can think of some future approximations using ML in those as well. So there is, I think, a potential to use more ML and AI there as well.
Does anybody else have any thoughts on this topic, or even before I move on to the next question?
Yeah, if I can jump in. So one of the things we haven't mentioned yet, I think this is important, is the use of deep learning models to, in essence, provide a faster approximation to more expensive computational methods. And the big one there is the explosion of models that, in essence, predict quantum mechanics. So there's a bunch of deep learning models out there that, in essence, you give it a collection of atoms in space, will happily tell you the energy of those atoms with quite a high degree of accuracy these days. And that's a calculation that takes a few seconds for the deep learning model, but could take hours or days to actually crunch the QM data. And so I think these are going to become increasingly important in the future. Combined with the other techniques you have, it provides a much more accurate way of assessing the energy of a system. And so if you ask me, I think next year or the year after is possibly a bit too soon, but almost certainly in 5 years and definitely in 10 years, if we're running free energy methods, we're not going to be using our traditional force fields most of the time. We're going to be using a deep learning model that takes a collection of atoms in space and tells you the energy, and that's going to be the fundamental simulation technology that we're using behind the free energy methods. And that should enable us to calculate things with significantly more accuracy than we have at the moment, because we won't be subject to the errors that we all know are present in the force fields that we use and we live with, because we don't have choice. There isn't anything better.
Interesting. So we've got a question here about synthetic data. Have you come across applications where synthetic data can be useful? I don't know who the right person to take this. Mutlu, would you kick us off, please, if possible?
Synthetic data may mean a molecule generated by AI, and I think, as we discussed, that's a great use case. Synthetic data needs to be, of course, validated. It needs to be studied. We need to check whether it's suitable for our target. If you are talking about a ligand, we need to support that with some kind of validation. But synthetic data is generally what we discussed already, generative chemistry, stuff. But going beyond the chemistry domain, synthetic data have been already used elsewhere in healthcare simulations, in physics. So the key here is to generate as realistic and representative data as much as possible, right? If your synthetic data generation process is biased, then no matter what validation you do, you are just looking at a small window, right? Or if it's not related to the problem you have in mind, then it's not relevant, right? So synthetic generation has a great place, and AI-based synthetic data generation is already highly utilized and sought for.
Does anybody else have anything to add on that topic, particularly the usefulness of synthetic data?
Maybe quickly, maybe the way I understand that question is synthetic data as a source of data to train model, and that is a known problem in general. And I think part of the issue is that the actual experimental data is scarce and expensive to acquire, right? And so I think we've seen waves of companies founding on the idea that that everything was going to be solved by training on data and then running into data bottleneck of all sorts. But I think going back to the theme of the discussion, what we are seeing, I think, is also simulation as a source of data, and then to train a model, and thinking about how you can fill gaps and develop models that you wouldn't be able to produce at a meaningful scale otherwise. So that also shows the potential for interplay between simulations and AI in the future.
Just to add very quickly to that, if you have a class imbalance situation in machine learning, you can obviously create new synthetic data to fill the gaps. That's a good way of using synthetic data before you do machine learning. But the downside is that your ML is built with artificial data points, right? So again, it comes back to how representative the data is when your model is facing real world problems.
Just finally, are you aware of any good courses or where can chemists go to kind of get started with coding skills? I guess that's open to anyone.
Ask ChatGPT. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
We can send a couple of links, and there are quite a few online free courses, tutorials, tailored for different backgrounds.
Yeah, perfect. I guess that's a good point to say that any of these questions, if we don't have time to answer them today, we will pass them along to the organisers, and they can get back to you at a later date. So don't fret, they won't be missed. And that kind of brings us to the end of today's discussion. I just want to once again just thank all the speakers that have been part of today's event. This content will remain live on Scientific Computing World website at www.scientific-computing.com for the next 12 months. So please spread the word if you've enjoyed this presentation. Of course, the Q&A will not be working if you're listening on demand. Once again, thank you very much to our speakers, Dr. Mutlu Dugrao, Dr. Mark Mackey, Dr. Louis Vidler, and Professor Julian Michel. And of course, thank you to our sponsor, Cresset. Thank you all for listening, and goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.